Hi, good morning. So today is the 24th of July, I'm sorry, of June 24th of June 2021. Every week we do a webinar for our members of our developer zone. And yeah, this is that webinar. So every week we like to do a little webinar for our members.
Hi, good morning.
So let me just scroll down. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for coming to the Developer Zone this morning. We do this webinar, and as you know, the Developer Zone is really for the sort of benefit of our Developer Zone members, and we have this webinar every week. We also do a lot of collaborations, and also we also offer jobs through the Developer Zone as well. So I just want to say that we had an inquiry about whether there are PhDs available, and the quick answer is there are. So we'll touch upon that this morning as well. So I just want to kind of put some news that on the 30th of June we're doing a webinar, well, a live demo on with PalmSense. So PalmSense make a pretty good potentiostat. Most of our screen printed electrodes and biosensors work with them, so they were kind enough to ask us to do a webinar with them. So we will do that. We're actually going to do a live glucose sensing webinar. So if you're interested in biosensors and you're interested in potentially glucose sensing, then we'll do a live demonstration alongside PalmSense on the 30th of June on glucose sensing. So that might be fun, and you can register, and I'll put a link underneath this video afterwards. So I do appreciate you guys coming along. Nice to see you this morning, Ali. I realize we have to speak soon. Just for a bit of fun, I really enjoy having founded and running Zimmer and Peacock. It's really quite a lot of fun. So I just thought I would sort of tell you about something that happened yesterday, and I think it makes a point as well. So yesterday I was speaking to a couple of very smart clinicians in the United Kingdom. These guys were very interested in understanding stroke patients, and they made a really good question, which was, well, can we just test the stroke patient using a single drop of blood? And so I kind of said, oh yeah, all our electrodes are meant to be able to do that. So I took the electrode. I took a lancet, so I just essentially pricked my finger, and I just dropped a bit of blood onto the sensor. But I think actually this really made a point for me as well, that I do get people ask us, we want this sort of electrode and it's going to have these dimensions, but actually so many of you, especially in the medical space, you're trying to make sensors that work in blood. And the one question I never ever receive is, can I detect a single drop of blood using your electrode? And so the quick answer is, with a Zimmer and Peacock electrode, you can test a single drop of blood. So I took the electrode. Yeah, here it is. So pretty small. I pricked my finger, which was fairly easy, and then I just dropped the blood on there. So I think that's a really important point, that if I'm trying to say, when choosing an electrode, one of the questions we never get asked, but it should always be asked, is, can it work with a single drop of blood? Because if it can't work with a single drop of blood, then it's probably not going to be good enough to become a medical diagnostic. So I might add that to the page. We got a page on the website sort of saying what's wrong with R&D screen printed electrodes, and I list out all the problems about quality and irreproducibility. But I think I might add to that page, actually, what's wrong with screen printed electrodes can be that they're so often big that you can't use them with a single drop of blood. So I've got one here, for example. It's fairly big. That's another, and this is one of ours. And the fact is, you could cover this one with a single drop of blood, but you couldn't cover this one with a single drop of blood. So it is important, if you are making biosensors, to ask the question, will this electrode that I'm developing upon allow me to detect, like a single drop of blood? And the answer, at least with the ZP electrode, is I tested it yesterday. I knew it could, but I tested it live in front of a client and it worked perfectly good. Right, so that was just a bit of fun now. So don't forget the webinar with PalmSense, and the nice thing about some of our screen printed electrodes is they're small enough essentially to work with a single drop of blood. So this webinar that we do every week, same time, 8 a.m. London time, we respond to the forum. So I just wanted to kind of say that, yeah, there is actually a PhD sponsored by Zimmer & Peacock open at the moment. It's at the University of Plymouth. You'll find it under job listings, PhD position with Zimmer & Peacock. So it is worth taking a look at that. It's, as I say, what time is that webinar? Yeah. So I think Ali's asking what time is not Ali, sorry. Yeah, what time is that webinar? I think it's about 2 p.m. Central European time, but I'd have to check. So yeah, there is a PhD available at the moment. If you're interested in sort of doing doctoral studies with Zimmer & Peacock, let us know. There were a few questions came in on the forum this week. So one guy, and Ali responded to him, but one guy was asking what's the difference in price for the same functional electrodes. And then we were asked a question about what is the role of the counter electrode or pseudo-reference electrodes in these kind of screen printed electrodes or biosensors. So first of all, if you go to the Zimmer & Peacock website, we've got at least 4 different types of pH sensors. First thing to say is the price drops, if you're just buying 2, they're expensive, but if you buy 10, the price changes. Hi, Abra. The price drops. So the question was, why have you, it's the same pH, it's a pH electrode, why have you got all these different prices? So let me just kind of go through it. So this is our one of our pH electrodes. It looks pretty similar to this, pretty small, solid state. Now this one is like 135 euros for 2. Like I say, the pricing changes if you choose more of them. Now that one it's a fairly simple electrode. We've only functionalized the working electrodes. We haven't functionalized the reference electrode. So it's on ceramic. Ceramic is a fairly expensive material, but we've only functionalized one of the electrodes. So it's sort of, it's that price, let's say. Now this one is more expensive. It's exactly the same. We've functionalized the working electrode, but we've also functionalized the reference electrode. So in some applications, the classic would be urine analysis. If you're trying to measure the pH of urine, then the pH of the urine is what you're trying to measure. But in the urine, there can also be a variable chloride concentration. And so we've had to make a reference electrode where the reference electrode is not chloride sensitive. So a lot of screen printed electrodes that you find on the internet, including ours, have a reference electrode that's silver chloride. Now silver chloride is, as a reference electrode, it has a voltage that's chloride dependent. So if you're trying to measure something like the pH of urine, the only thing that you want your sensor to be sensitive to is the pH. But if it's urine and the chloride is also changeable, then you need to buffer or protect your reference electrode against that chloride. So the difference between the first 2 electrodes is this one has an unprotected reference electrode. So it'll work well in things like bloods, because the chloride is very invariable in blood, but it wouldn't work so well in applications where the chloride could be varying, like urine. Whereas this one is better protected. Better is, I use the word better, is better protected because we've put an extra polymer on the reference electrode to protect it against chloride changes. But it's also reflected in the price, because now essentially, rather than just doing manufacturing of the working electrode, we're manufacturing the reference electrode as well. And I mean, I like the developers though, because essentially the easier something is to make, then the lower cost we can make it. But once you start adding increased chemicals and increased processes, then the price goes up. Now this is one of my favourite pH electrodes, because here, you know, we're in fact selling 10 of them for €200, so €20 each. You can see it's really sort of a fifth of the price of some of our other pH sensors. So this one has a working electrode that's pH sensitive. It has the unbuffered reference electrode, so we haven't put an extra sort of protection of chloride on that. And the reason it's so much less money is because it's made of a material called PET. So this electrode here is made of PET. It's quite soft. I can bend it, so it's a polymer. And the fact that it's made of a polymer means the material costs are lower, and we also manufacture it on what's called bigger sheets. Yeah. I like Ali's. Ali just said, you know, he likes the reference electrode idea. Yeah, we do that. So the third one I showed just now it's made on a different material, and so that actually allows us to lower the cost of the materials that go into it, and we also can manufacture it at a larger volume. So the pricing reflects that. So the first electrode here, it's on ceramic. It has an unfunctionalized reference electrode. It has a certain price. The next one is more expensive because we've now got the almost true reference electrode, where we've buffered the chloride on the reference electrode and made it chloride insensitive. The third one, it has the unbuffered reference electrode, but it's made on PET, and that really helps us drop the price. And then this one, this is a real good. This is really good. It's essentially 9 pH sensors in a very tiny array. So this is something that I'm starting to work with a lot of academic groups and really getting them interested. Because essentially what we have going on here is we have a kind of reference electrode and 9 pH sensors. So that allows you to either just use all 9 pH sensors and average the result and have a very accurate pH reading, or the way we've used it, it allows you to actually see the spatial resolution of pH. That if you have like a cell culture on there and there were different zones of pH, you could actually see that resolution using this array. So this is actually 9 pH sensors in one. It's more complicated to make. The price goes up a lot because essentially there's 9 sensors on that particular electrode. So I think that's pretty cool. So the quick answer for this is the price reflects the materials of construction, the complexity of that construction. I think really that it comes down to that. This one has actually low cost materials, but actually there's 9 electrodes that we have to functionalize. This one is a low cost material. There's only 1 electrode, so it's pretty low cost. This one is on ceramic. That makes it more expensive, and we've had to functionalize the reference electrode. And this one is just on ceramic, which is expensive, and we've only functionalized the working electrode. So sorry for the complexity. Now the complexity comes about because of this. The biggest, I always say this, but the biggest consumers of biosensors at Zimmer and Peacock is Zimmer and Peacock. You know, we make these things for ourselves and then we put them on the web store, just to kind of help the community, you know, also develop their applications as well. So anyway, I'll move on a bit now. If you Google screen printed electrodes, you'll find quite a few of these images, and there's a consistency in all of these images, which is we always have the reference electrode, working electrode, and counter electrode always in the same place. You know, so we have a kind of consistency that, depending on your view, if you're looking at our electrode, then the reference electrode is to the right, the middle electrode is the working electrode, and our counter electrode is to the far left. And I'm also being very consistent on the colouring as well. I don't think everyone realises, but this is a kind of, yeah, so Ali was just asking, which would you recommend for well water analysis? For well water analysis, I'd actually recommend the PET one, even though the chloride might be uncontrolled. In the first instance, I would almost pull the well water up, add 1 volume of well water to 4 volumes of buffer to control the chloride, and then do the analysis. But with well water, I think, I think using the PET electrode and getting that low cost is what you need. But back to this point. So the reason I'm asking this question, the reason I've got these images up, is the forum asked us, what is the point of this reference electrode? And I just want to first of all tell you that we always have the reference electrode in the same point, same place. But I do want to answer the question, what's the point of this reference electrode? So if you look at any of our electrodes, we often say, by default, the middle electrode is the working. By default, the right-hand electrode is the reference, and by default, it's the counter electrode. If you're doing a potentiometric experiment or measurement, a potentiometric, hi Amit. If you're doing a potentiometric experiment, you do not need all 3 electrodes. You only need to connect to the working electrode and the reference electrode. So if you're using a pH sensor from Zimmer & Peacock, you actually don't need this counter electrode. We have it there because we make a screen printed electrode, we make it in a 3 electrode geometry, but sometimes you don't need it. So if you're making a measurement on a potentiometric electrode, sometimes I use the word ion selective electrode. Does ZP do thiolated gold electrodes? The quick answer is we do. Well, I'm just being asked online whether we do thiolated gold electrodes. The quick answer is we do. We have something called activated screen printed electrodes. So activated screen printed electrodes is something we have on the website. Now the forum question was, why do you have that reference electrode? And the quick answer is, do you need 3 electrodes when doing a potentiometric measurement? The answer is you actually don't. You only just need to essentially measure the voltage between 2 electrodes. And it didn't have to be the 2 electrodes that I showed there. You could have measured it between these 2 electrodes. I know that seems a bit strange, but if you're making a potentiometric measurement, you do need to probably attach the working electrode, because that's the one that you've made into the ion selective electrodes. And then you probably want to attach to the reference electrodes. But you could have also done it between the working and counter. The reason you can do this with ZP electrodes is because we're quite unusual that our reference electrode is silver chloride and our counter electrode is silver chloride. So in potentiometric measurements, you could use either of those electrodes. It's unusual, and I know I've spoken about it in the past, but we like to know what's going on in our counter electrodes. If you ask many scientists and electrochemists what's happening at your counter electrode, they can't always answer the question. With Zimmer and Peacock electrodes, we know exactly what's happening on our counter electrode. If we're either oxidizing silver to silver chloride or we're reducing silver chloride to silver. So that really, it defines what we're doing. It means you don't have anything strange happening at your counter electrode that could interfere with your working electrode. So we were asked in the forum why the 3rd electrode, and the answer is you don't need the 3rd electrode when you're doing potentiometric measurements. You just need to connect to either the working and counter, or or you could swap it with our electrodes and go between the working and counter or the working and reference. I took a long time to sort of explain that. Now the reason we have 3 electrodes is really because it comes from the potentiostat itself. So this is a potentiostat circuit based on op-amp. I mean, this is an absolute classic in electrochemistry, but this op-amp setup has sort of 3 terminals, one for the counter, one for the reference, and one for the working. So when you connect to a potentiostat, the working gets connected to the working, the reference gets... Did I do that correct? Yeah, the reference gets connected to the reference and the counter gets connected to the counter. Now the reason why potentiostats often require 3-electrode system is because of a process called polarization. Electrochemists, and we like to apply a voltage, and we like that voltage to be fixed. If you have 2 electrodes, it means that you're putting current through the reference. So if you're doing an amperometric experiment or a voltammetric experiment, if you've only got 2 electrodes, it means the current is flowing through the reference. And that means the reference doesn't have a fixed voltage. It has a voltage that can change due to the amount of current that flows. So because the voltage is changing, you're getting a change in current if you were doing an amperometric experiment. But then you're left with the question, is my current changing because I'm getting more reaction, or is it changing just because the voltage is changing? So in amperometric and voltammetric experiments, we do not want the current to go through the reference often, because we don't want to polarize it and allow the reference voltage to shift around. So most potentiostats actually want you to be, let's say, in a 3-electrode mode to stop the polarization of the reference. If you're doing a potentiometric experiment, that's ion selective electrodes like pH, potassium, glucose, calcium, nitrate, ammonium, whatever other ones we've got going on, you don't worry about this because there's no current flowing. You measure the voltage using what's a high impedance, essentially voltmeter. Sometimes there is another electrode which is sensing electrode. Yeah, he's right. So Ahmet is just saying I'm oversimplifying this, but in some systems you actually have four leads. But potentiometric experiments, you don't need the 3 electrodes because you're flowing no current. So therefore, you just need the 2 electrodes to measure the voltage between the working and a reference. In amperometric experiments or voltammetric experiments, you are flowing current, and actually if you flow the current through your reference, its voltage can end up shifting, which can end up giving you a change in signal. So you're not sure if your signal is due to the reaction of interest or due to just the voltage changing around. So we don't allow, let's say, current to go through the reference electrode. Now the big secret is, when you're doing biosensing, because your currents are often quite small, you can actually short the reference and counter together and put current through the reference electrode. Only because in biosensing the currents are often quite small. They're often maybe less than 10 microamps, and often even less than a microamp. You're into the sort of hundreds of nanoamps. So I know I'm confusing the situation slightly, but if you do a PhD in electrochemistry, they will say to you, oh no, you need 3 electrodes to do these experiments, counter, working, and reference. But what they should say is, you need 3 electrodes when the current is fairly significant. But actually, you guys who are doing biosensing, your currents are actually quite small, so you can actually run in 2-electrode mode. But for simplicity, we ship our electrodes in 3-electrode mode. The secret is, when you're doing potentiometric experiments, the instrument often turns off the other electrode and you're only actually using 2 electrodes anyway. I know that's quite complicated, but I'm glad I made a video of it so you can rewind it a few times and watch that. We can dig into this deeper and deeper, but once you start going down this, it's a real sort of nest of complexity. But I hope I've at least given you a first introduction to it. So we make these electrodes, and you can't quite see, well, possibly you can see it, but we make the reference electrode to the left, the working electrode in the middle, and the counter electrodes to the counter electrode on the left and working electrode on the right, reference electrode on the right, sorry. So when you plug these electrodes into something like the Sensit Smart, or you plug them into the front of the Anapot, you essentially don't have to worry about which electrode is which, because the connection just takes care of that assignment. And I'll just put some links there. Now, with the Anapot actually has 2 places where you can actually plug in the electrode. You can either plug it in the front I've actually got an anapot here, one of the older models. So when you plug it in the front, you don't have to worry about which cable is which. It just, it's just by default. Now on the back of the anapot, there's actually a connection here where you can put a cable. Now that is kind of useful sometimes. I don't talk about it very often. I just sort of say, I'll stick it in the front and it'll be fine. But yeah, there's a connection around the back. Now what that connection means is that you can, sometimes you might, for your own reason, want to actually swap which electrode is which. And so what you can do is you can get a connector, like we have these on our web store. And by default, we expect that you would use that as the reference, that as the working, and that as the counter electrode. These are called 3mm female banana, let's say, plugs. And what you would do is you would connect the reference cable to there, the working electrode to there, the counter electrode to there. But of course you can actually swap them round, and there'll be times where somebody's asking me a question and maybe I'll recommend that you actually swap them around. Now the reason I've kind of gone into this a little bit this morning is because we've actually got some new electrodes that have come out. They've got some unusual geometries about them. I've just put them up here. So these have come about and they're on the web store. But see, this is a reference electrode and it's kind of huge, and the counter electrode is tiny. Now we've done it for, let's say our reasons, because we're always doing biosensors, we're always doing it for clients. But I could see that you'd actually want to swap those two electrodes around. So in that scenario, I actually think it's better to use a connector and a cable, because then you can just take the cable and swap the electrodes around, and then you can make a more sensible, let's say, electrode configuration. So I went through all of that earlier conversation because we've just released some new electrodes, but I could realize that people would look at that and say, well, your counter electrode is tiny and your reference electrode is big. Wouldn't it be better to just do it the other way around? And the answer is, yeah, for quite a lot of experiments, it actually would be better to do it the other way around. But this connector would, if you use the connector, you can then just easily swap the banana plugs over, and you can affect that. So you can just use that connector and just swap it over. I'm not gonna, I realize it's 8:28 now, so I'm not going to do, I've still got a whole load of material I want to talk about biometric, sensor metrics, but I'm going to skip it because it's 8:28. I do appreciate you guys, who come on. I mean, April was here today, so it was really nice to see April. Ahmet is always, very consistent with us. Ahmet's been, I'm very much looking forward to seeing some material, Ahmet, about your open source potentiostat. So let me know about that. So appreciate Ali as well coming along today, and also Mohammed has also come along today, so appreciate it. So in summary, 30th of July, I think it's 2 p.m. Central European time. There's a live demonstration on glucose sensing. There is a PhD that's open, so if you're, cool. And Hitcham is online as well, so that's cool as well. We do have a PhD open. You can find that on the forum. The pH sensors are a different price based on the material and the complexity of their manufacturing. And there was a lot of information about counter electrode, working electrode, and reference electrode today. So I know that was a lot, and we might have to go over it a few more times. But if the questions come in the forum, then we'll definitely answer them. So I appreciate your time today, guys. Thank you very much. Cool. And Ahmet says he'll tell us about it when he's finished, which is cool. All right. So it's 8:29, just coming up to 8:30. I'm sure you guys, some of you got some meetings to attend. I know I have. But thanks for coming again. And yeah, see me in the forum. Reached out to me on LinkedIn and stuff, and we'll have those chats. All right. Cool. Ali, I need to get back to you, so I will do. All right. Take care, guys.